right, so we're returning now to the site, and we've put in the content, and we've dealt a little bit with the layout. Now what seems to be missing is the part that makes it feel more like the web, which is graphics. Now, I am one of those people who thinks that the less graphics, the better. That is, keep it as simple as possible. And so I'm really only going to have a very small number of small, like, grace notes that make up the texture and graphics of the site. One of the big pieces, though, however, is the background itself. If you go out on the web, you'll find there's lots of textures that you can use as backgrounds, and lots of sort of already done, either freely available or for a small expense, some sort of background that looks interesting. I am a big fan, however, of looking around my desk or around the world and finding found objects that would make for interesting backgrounds, textures, and images. For the purposes of this site, this is what I used. This is a torn piece of Quinnipiac letterhead laid on top of the case for my Kindle. And so, a leather kind of textured case for my Kindle. This is a very simple kind of setup. I could have chosen all sorts of other things, from my trash can to a plastic bag. All these things would make interesting backgrounds, at least in my opinion. So I encourage you to experiment a bit with that. All you need is a decent scanner, and these things are fairly cheap these days to kind of go in. Actually, if you don't even have that, you can often use your camera to use that. And then you need to apply some skill in Photoshop that we're not going to talk about because this isn't a Photoshop class. But we will take a quick look at those images. So basically, there are just these 4 images that I'm going to use for now. The first of these is the main background. And because I'm using a fixed layout, because I know that the stuff is always going to be over here on the left-hand side, and I kind of know roughly where it's going to be, I can do it this way. I might need to use 2 different graphics files image files if I were going to use, that standard self-centering block that's often seen with blogs. Then I'd have to save this stuff over here as a separate image, and then this thing as the main image. But as it is, I can kind of just throw them together here. You'll see that I've got on the edge a little bit of stitching here. I've had to do a little bit of work to make sure that you don't see the lines, or at least they're not immediately obvious when we tile these. Often when you're doing this, it can be a single line or only 5 pixels wide. I've made it a bit taller and therefore have a very large image size for this. I think it's running up at about like 25K, which is more than I would like to use. But again, it's my personal blog. If this were for a professional site, I might be concerned a little bit more with how big that is and how long the load time will be. For now, I think it'll work when it tiles. And then on top of this, there are images at the top and the bottom that kind of cap it. The header image, so this just lays on top of at the very top, and then the footer image, and this does obviously the same thing on the bottom. You can see with the ripped edge that I kind of did not manipulate in Photoshop. I manipulated with my hands by ripping an edge, and that worked out pretty well. Okay, so and then the last one is this PNG file with a bunch of silhouetted icons. These are 50 by 50. Obviously, I'm using it as a sprite rather than having 8 different images or 10 different images. I can put them all in the same file and load them once and reuse them. This whole file is 6K, so it's tiny, but I can kind of pop those in when I need them. I'm going to use these as category headers. I'm going to use this to put next to the Twitter thing. With all of these images, I might have to go back and revisit them and tweak them a bit, but I'm hoping they'll come pretty close first time through. All right, so how are we going to do this? First thing we need to do is lay something behind. There's a main section. There's a header section. We could put it in the wrapper. I'm actually going to put it in the body itself since there's some stuff going on with the wrapper. So I'm going to attach something to the body here. To do that, I'm going to go to this end, and I'm going to look at appearance, and I'm going to go down below where we've done the stuff with the font embeds. Oh, we did them twice. No, we didn't. There's the imports. There's the font embeds. All right, I've already said something about the body and the font size there. I'm going to do something. Oh, there's a bit more there on that. We'll do it here. I'm going to put in a quick note here about the body. background, the URL. Now the URL is images/main background. Obviously, as part of the prep here, I've uploaded these images that I just showed you to the directory images in my theme. And so because the images directory is in the same directory as style.css, it looks for an images directory and then it looks for main background inside, and then I'm going to have it repeat. Note that this will repeat both way out the far edge, although you'll have to have a very large screen to see it, but the most important thing is that it repeats Y, so it goes up and down. So let's see what this looks like if we save it. Alright. It's amazing what a little bit of text will do for us in difference. We still have that problem with this being too long, something we're going to have to change in the template, I fear. But it's amazing what just that little step does to make this look a little bit more finished and blog-like. I have a slight repeating pattern here on the left-hand side, but it doesn't bother me too much. Kind of a reflection. I could go in and clean that up if I wanted, but you see why I took a big chunk here. If it had been a small chunk, that repetition would have been much more obvious, both in the texture of over here and in the texture of the page itself. All right, so we still have that line there. That's actually a border, as is this one down here, that we'll have to take out of the CSS in a bit. But let's go ahead and put the header in. So we'll just go to where we had put in the body. It's much the same thing. In fact, we can largely copy and paste. And header. I guess the thing that's different is that we want no repeat on this one because we only want one header. Shouldn't be a problem. There's not really space for it to repeat anyway, but might as well do that for the fun of it. And we'll go ahead and update the file. All right, so that actually lines up pretty nicely. I'm going to want to move this over to the right a little bit. I can do that in Firebug to see how to do it. I'll choose it. Just this right here. This is the title, which is part of blog title. So blog title, I've got the font. Oh, I've already got one there for blog title, which is great. I'll have to do another one for blog title, and I'll just want to indent it a little bit. I'll put in a little bit of a left-hand margin so that it moves over. Let me go ahead and do that. I'm just going to eyeball it and say that it needs to come in about 100. So let's do a quick blog title left. Again, this is a wild guess. I don't know where this will end up, but I can start there and go back and tweak it later. All right, so it's still too close. I'll probably have to go to 150 or 170, but you get an idea. And then under that needs to come the, I'll probably need to choke this up a bit when I put a menu in here eventually. What about the footer? Let's go ahead and take care of that. The footer is going to go in. Luckily, this is laid out in a very clean way. We've got header, main, footer, so that's great. So we know that we're going to put it in the footer. Let's go ahead and we do the same thing all over again. You can actually copy, paste, and we'll change this to footer, and we'll go ahead and save that, and we'll click over and refresh real quick. All right, so we've got a couple of issues here. Actually, the footer looks fine. Again, this line is a border that we'll want to take out. We've got a little bit of an issue here that it's actually not covering up enough, and the issue there is not so much with the footer as with, there's the footer. Let's open up the footer and see what's inside. It's a fairly simple footer. All it's got inside is this, site info, but site info is causing us problems. First of all, the color shouldn't be gray. We want it to be pretty bright. Not quite completely bright, but we could do this. Oops. For example, it's a little bit lighter, so it'll show up on the black background. Oops. Still want to be working on site info. Let's make the font size just a little bit bigger. And this line height we really don't need. We don't need it to be pushing out the bottom. We don't need anything there at all. Alright, so we do, however, need a little bit more padding on the top because it's running into the rough edge. So let's change this to, say, 35. So that pushes it underneath. That's great. But we also need to get rid of the padding on the bottom. So all these changes I've just made in Firebug, I'm going to have to go back and kind of translate them back over to the actual CSS. But